Okay, Nick and Ruth, Q&A, Friday, March 12th, 3, 2, 1. All right, good morning, Nick.
Good morning, Ruth, and everyone else
So,
listening.
yes, good morning, everyone else listening. This is Ruth and Nick. I'm Ruth O'Donnell. I'm the coordinator at the Foot Nerd program, and I'm here with Nick St. Louis. He's the chief foot nerd and the CEO of the Foot Collective. So we're here this morning because we have a question and answer session based on a few different topics that we were going over in the last week. And I had so many questions about what we were talking about that we realized that probably our entire community would have the same questions. So what we're talking about today are some exciting developments in our community. The Foot Nerd program is a project that was developed by the Foot Collective, and it's a year-long learning journey. And all of this is developing and evolving as we go along. So we're going to talk about three things today, three specific points. We're going to talk about the evolution of this community from the beginning, where it started, and where we're headed in the next couple of years. And then we're going to talk about a concept called decentralized learning, which is, you know, I'm a pretty smart person, but like some of the decentralized learning, I kind of have an idea about it, but I'm like, what is that? And so I was asking Nick, like, well, what the hell is it? Why is it important? And what are the benefits? And if I have those questions, I imagine a lot of other people do too. And then we wanted to talk about how is it all going to work? So I just want to say good morning again to everybody, and then welcome Nick. And then we're going to get busy. I'm going to ask him a ton of questions. He's going to answer them, and we'll see where it all goes.
I'll do my best to answer them. I can't claim that. First of all, I reserve the right to change my mind tomorrow, so any answers I give are, are transient often. But yeah, I'm excited because Ruth, you asked great questions. And like you said, you know, you're like part of the inner core group with this. And if you have questions, everyone else on the more kind of outer rims of involvement definitely have these questions if they're curious about them. So yeah, I'm excited for this.
Okay, so let's get started.
Sounds good.
So I joined the Foot Collective and the Foot Nerd program last year. And I did my best to do my research about what it all is. I found out that there was something called Beam Tribe and the Foot Collective and the Foot Nerd program. I took a digital seminar, which saved my body and my sanity, getting on that beam and playing around and reclaiming the fun aspect of moving my body. And then I wanted to dive in deeper. So then I enrolled in the Foot Nerd program in this year-long journey. It's been wonderful. And then going deeper into the community, I was able to finagle my way into the internal group in order to like help lead the program, because it's really, I find it to be very valuable and important for our communities at large. But I'm still putting the pieces together. So can you just take us from maybe the beginning of like where your education actually, like it would be really nice to hear like where you saw the problems, and then how you realized that there might be solutions, and then how you came through and where we are today.
Sounds good. And I think I should first say that I often find myself in the same situation of trying to put the pieces together, because it kind of just rolled on its own momentum. And sometimes I'm playing catch up and be like, oh, how did we get here? What are we doing? Are we doing the right things? So, you know, maybe a good place to start is, why is it called the Foot Collective? Because I think that probably, you know, in terms of the origin story, is probably a good place to start. And, you know, about 5 years ago, it came from the realization that, you know, as a physio, I treated people for problems with their bodies, for issues they were having, injuries, pain, whatever it might be. And I was sort of hanging out with friends, and we were at a con, none of us had shoes on. And I had this insight where I was like, it feels way better to not have shoes on. And I looked at the shape of my shoes and I was like, I think our shoes are messing our feet up. And so from then on, I was like, I wonder if I can, you know, number one, go on this learning process myself, because I had pretty messed up feet from wearing rugby cleats, which were really just soccer cleats. And I was like, well, I should probably see if I can restore my feet back to their normal function by changing my footwear and just kind of spending more time barefoot. And after a little bit of time in that, I was like, this is working really well, and my feet are adapting, and this is great. I wonder if other people would be interested in this. And so I started to assess patients in the clinic, the physiotherapy clinic I worked in, barefoot. And I was like, wow, everyone's got messed up feet. Whether they're coming to see me for foot problems or not, that's their only contact to the ground. It's probably an important body part. So let's see if people want to learn about it. Started a social media account, and I called it the Foot Collective because it really was going to be a collective effort, in that if I can find other people who are also interested about feet, let's all accumulate our knowledge together and learn about this together, because I'm not going to claim to know anything special. I only know what my experiences led me to learn. And it would seem really beneficial if other people could just contribute their knowledge, because we can all learn more together than independently. So that's where it started. Initially had a focus on feet, and then it kind of worked out to be like, well, feet cannot be looked at independently from our hips. They're very interconnected systems. So then it was like feet and hips. And then I was like, well, shit, all this simple stuff with feet really applies to all elements of health. I wonder, what is health? How do I understand health? And the more I dove into it, the more I realized, like, I'm not really doing what I should be doing for optimal health. Mm-hmm. And here I was, a quote unquote health professional with a degree in physiotherapy, and I understood very little about health. I understood a lot about symptom treatment and management and diagnosis, but diagnosing and managing a disease is very different from health. Like, those are almost like total opposites, right? Like, health is the absence of disease. Therefore, you don't really need to be treated if you're healthy. And along the way, even when it was still in the foot and hip stage, I realized, like, I don't have any special knowledge. I don't have any special abilities. I just work hard to learn things. So I wonder if I can try and find all of the sources of knowledge I've accumulated to date, put them into kind of a package, and offer that as a deeper learning program for people who want to really understand this on a deeper level, right? Not just through social media, but through a deeper engagement with learning about this. And that was sort of the initial Footner program. It was literally a PDF with tons of resources. I wrote some stuff, but it was more like pointing people in the right direction to this curated package of really smart people that I had learned from. And from there, it went from feet and hips into health, and it went from a PDF to an online database that was sort of accessible. And then here we are today, where it's 150 people from around the world, and that's just people like I always like to be the least smart people in the room. And if we look at the Footner program as a room, I feel like there's a lot of really smart people in this room that I learned from, whether it's like an emergency room physician, or a physio, or a chiro, or a yoga instructor, or just like a single mom that has a really unique perspective on health. It's pretty magic. So that's where we are today. Hopefully that gives a little bit of background.
Yeah. So where did the beam come in?
The beam came in, that's a good question. Because the beam kind of went from like this playful toy that I was experimenting with to like a pretty core element of TFC. And the beam initially came from, so Mike is the guy that I do Shop Talk episodes with, and he's one of like my best friends. I went to high school with him. We went to physio school together. His dad is a sports med doctor, and actually was the one who suggested we might do well exploring physiotherapy. And when I always go to courses with him, one thing we just gravitated towards doing was balancing on railings. And I think it was, and when I look back, I think it was because when you go away on a course, we owned a business together. Owning a business is like chewing glass and leaning into a dark black hole. It's like, there's a lot, you're taking on a lot of problems. So it has to really be worth it to you. Yeah, it's you gotta really want to do it if you're going to do it. But I think what it was is like, when we went away on courses, towards the end, I would always think of like all the things I'd have to do when we got back home, all the business admin stuff, all the scheduling stuff, and just like my brain just couldn't stop. And I think I found that by balancing on a railing, number one, it was fun, and we would kind of like compete against each other to see who would fall off first. But it also calmed my brain down completely. I could only focus on what I was doing at that point in time if I didn't want to fall off. And I was like, this is a very interesting tool, because I can feel my body connecting a lot of dots and sorting things out, and I'm really just having fun. So I bought a piece of industrial scaffolding, put it in the clinic. I got kids playing on it. I got 80-year-olds playing on it. And it told me a lot about how well they were able to control their body by just watching them on it. And the good news was, like, every second someone was on there was integrating their feet and hips, improving their foot strength, and it was fun. Like, I haven't ever had to kick kids out of the clinic before. And so I was like, there's something to this. Let's see if we can expand it. And now there's like, this wall of beams behind me. I like the idea of creating something immensely simple and building it really well in Ottawa. And so the beam was an outlet for that. And now it's, now it's growing quite a bit. So it's pretty cool to see.
Well, and I think it's interesting because it's not like you and Mike went out to reinvent the wheel, right? So if we could just go back to like what we, my background's in kinesiology, you're in physical therapy. We have tons of other physical therapists. I think you were in a good position because you and Mike owned your business, so you were able to do whatever you wanted in your clinic. I hear a lot from physical therapists who are feeling stifled because they're working for a larger company or a larger institution in which like going barefoot in the clinic is not allowed. The things that we do in the Foot Nerd program and in the Foot Collective and the principles that we build our health on here doesn't seem to be the type of coursework or patient care that other physical therapists and other healthcare practitioners can do in their institutions. So I guess my question is, like you noticed in physical therapy school between what you were learning, right? Because we talked before we got on that university and education, higher education isn't not valuable. It's just that in our field in particular, we don't necessarily get the forward thinking tools to be able to help people to trust their bodies, right? So symptom care and treatment is different than like teaching people that they have a magical healing machine that can do everything that it needs to do, including heal and be strong and flexible and move and squat and play. And so you saw a need, right? So like maybe you can speak to the idea that this is not something that's just like, we're just trying to start something new. We're trying to fill a need in a certain way, right?
Yeah, we're trying to solve a problem. And you're right. I was very fortunate to be able to have our own, call it a sandbox to play in, because that's really like, I want to make people coming in here want to come in here. I want it to be fun. And I want people to leave not just with like a less sore shoulder. I want them to leave with a bigger understanding of like, why is my shoulder sore? Like, and I want to create a space where people can undo the narratives of your body breaks down as you get older, or, like injuries just happen and you have to take a passive approach to it. You have to go see people to help you. You can't help yourself. And so, we had this beautiful area that we called the Movement Dojo, where it was more about, a big reason we started the clinic was, you do rotations in physio school, practical rotations. And in so many of those rotations, I was like, the business models used in physical therapy are so old and ancient and ineffective and profit driven, and they're really not helping people, right? When you get someone in, you see them for 15 minutes and then they play around doing meaningless exercises that are boring. That's not a very engaging environment to get people reacquainted with the joy of movement, which is really what physical therapy is all about, right? It's supposed to be physical. It's not like putting machines on you or like all this nonsense that still gets done. And in fact, is still taught in school. That's the crazy part, right? Like, if a physical therapist graduates from school, just does what they learned in school within the business model that's used at large, they will not help people. You can help people, but you're not truly going to help people's health. You're just going to like put little Band-Aids on and people have to come back to see you to get the Band-Aids replaced. And like, that's sustainable. It's not sustainable whatsoever. And it's actually, the shitty part is like, it doesn't help the people going in for help. And clinicians often burn out because they're literally trying to tread water in this like waterfall nonstop, where people are constantly coming in with problems. You're not solving the problems, you're just helping them a bit. And it's like overwhelming. And I know a lot of physios that have just become disenfranchised. And they're like, I don't want to do this anymore. This sucks.
Yeah, for sure. And it doesn't.
So, sorry, go ahead.
I think you're absolutely right. And so then we come to, now you have a developing group of people who are following along and taking and collectively recreating or creating a new paradigm. And so now we have the Foot Nerd program, and we have the Foot Collective, and we have a growing community, right? So we could talk about Dunbar's number, and we could talk about that people, well, physical therapists who are burning out, and this is just like one aspect of healthcare. We're talking about physical therapy because you are one, and we work with people in movement and restoring their health and reclaiming their, so that's our next topic, is about like how we are empowering ourselves to reclaim full responsibility for our own well-being, which is the opposite of what you're talking about, right? So you're talking about physical therapists burning out because people go, and now people have no belief in their own body to heal itself. They think that muscle stim or Band-Aids or keno tape or whatever it is, like is the key. And I'll be honest, like I look at that keno tape and I'm like, maybe that'll fix me.
Right. It's simple.
But
it's like, I just had to put a piece of tape on and I'm healed.
It's like,
amen.
Exactly. I'm like, just put that there on my shoulder. But so now we have a group of 150 people who are claiming responsibility for our own healthcare, and it's invigorating, because now you realize that as a physical therapist who's giving the power back, like you can do it. Like, it's not my responsibility to care for your health, it's yours. And not only that, it's fun. So now we go to TFC as the Foot Collective, and I want to talk about your idea about, in your debrief notes, you talk about your idea about the Foot Collective becomes the future community. And I think that's so fascinating and great that the acronym works. So will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's even just the letters TFC. I have a crazy brain that just loves to come up with ideas and shoots from, like, it's like literally a straight up ADD brain. And I've tried to do well to kind of harness that. But one thing I find I need to do is create constraints, where it's like, I need to create limitations for me to work within so that I can't just do everything. And one limitation I came up with early on was like, I always want to be involved in work on TFC, but TFC can mean a lot of things, right? It can mean the footwear company, it can mean the Foot Collective, it can mean the future community. And the future community is really broad. So that's a really good umbrella. But I think, it's always good to start with an aspiration and then sort of work backwards to design how you can get towards that aspiration. And, the Foot Collective so far has been sort of this expanding group of people who started with an interest in foot health and have sort of transitioned into a community of people with an interest in health. And an ideal aspiration to look towards and sort of create excitement for the future is to think of the future community and what does the future community look like? What are elements of that community? What are things that, that community will embody? And I think, first off, the future community is a global community of healthy humans. I really think that's the foundation for the future community, right? Like team human, right? Doesn't matter where you are in the world, what color your skin is, what your education level is. The future community is a group of humans on planet Earth that are healthy. A community of connected, open-minded, creative, innovative, kind, supportive humans focused on creating a better world. And I think part of that means living in alignment with nature, both our habitat and also our human physiology, right? Living in alignment with our biology and what it's meant to do. And so to me, that's really what TFC is now, is the future community embodying those kind of elements. And that's sort of the filter I put everything that TFC does through to make sure it actually aligns with, make sure our work aligns with that notion of creating the future community. So hopefully that explains it a little bit.
Yeah, it does. And so that kind of rolls us forward. Like, I know that you are, you have like a top-down vision. I like how your expansive views, because I think we work well together, because like you have this really good way of making a very big concept actually doable. And I love that. And so can we talk about decentralized learning? Because I can break down the word and kind of gather it, but I would love for you to talk about like your idea. You've been talking about it for as long as I have been listening to you. And I want to like just hone in and clarify, like, what is it? why is it important, and why am I going to benefit from that?
Okay, yeah. So this is a big one, but hopefully I can, I've been thinking about this a lot over the past couple of days since we sort of started talking about this. And so hopefully I can clarify this a little bit and even give some tangible examples. So the concept of decentralization was sort of, I have this fascination with distributed networks, and that's come from sort of a long time interest in Bitcoin. And we won't talk about that, but basically, the whole notion that Bitcoin's built on is rules without rulers, right? So you create a set of rules. Everyone who wants to play by those rules plays the game, but no one ruler is ruling the game, right? The power is distributed to the people who agree to play this game. And if we take decentralized or distributed learning, I think that we can even start by unpacking the two terms. So learning being the acquisition of knowledge or skills through sort of experience or study or being taught by someone. And then
Nikki Pop, can I just want to clarify this as we go along. So if I'm in a university classroom, for example, and there's a professor there professing, and there's a group of 20 people sitting in there on their high knees in a chair. So that might have been really great back in the day at some point. But now it's like the knower, right? We talk about the knowers, like professing their knowledge, and then somebody consuming that knowledge and then taking it as truth. Well, number one, it's like very low energy. It's like not. I mean, I've seen it in France and like the traditions. That's a tradition. And then now with technology, with students in screens in university and the professor professing, now you have just like almost like zombie style classrooms where there is like the only, and I think that the professors in a certain way are getting burnout, just like the physical therapists. So when we talk about, so I just want to set the stage, like what you're talking about, right? So right now we have this model of like professor professing and student consuming, and then just taking that as truth.
Yeah, and so that would be a centralized broadcast form of teaching, right? Centralized in that the knower is the holder of the knowledge, and they are broadcasting or pushing out that knowledge to people, to others.
Yes.
Whereas, decentralization really means that decisions or sorry, were you gonna say something?
No. I just wanted to give that actual vision of like what the opposite of that is.
Well, that's important to mention. So thank you for doing that. And then, so that's centralized broadcast learning where one person knows the things, they broadcast it to a bunch of other people. And then, when something is decentralized, it means that, and this can relate to either decisions or power. Government is the centralization of power in a country. And in this case, the learning is distributed away from a central authority and into a network of interconnected nodes. So it's decentralized. It's not one central entity, it's multiple entities across a network. And so, I really think that learning is like the most important skill that a human today can have. Like it's a super, and what most people don't realize, it's a skill that can be practiced and mastered, right? Like people say, oh, I'm not a good learner. Well, it's like everyone can be a good learner. You just have to have the motivation to work on it. And, in a world today where it's like literally changing, every month we live in a different world. Every year we live in a different world. Learning is the superpower that allows you to adapt as the world changes. So learning is really the key skill, regardless of what that's applied to.
And by the way, learning is not comfortable or easy, right?
Right. So learning happens through making mistakes and screwing up.
Right. And also like when you're talking about centralized learning platforms, like where you passively are kind of just letting the knower's information wash over you, that's not actually learning.
Right.
So everybody
mostly rote memorization.
And nobody thinks they're a good learner because it's very uncomfortable. So anyway, I just wanted to put that in.
Yeah, no, that's a valid point. And so, like I said, like traditional school is, the primary learning and the knowledge applies to a professor, broadcasts it. And if we contrast that with the Footnote program, for example, everyone in this program, 150 people, let's call them nodes on a network, is doing individual learning and then contributing that knowledge into the network so that we can collectively decide like what is the best knowledge. This hive mind mentality where when one person learns, we all learn. An insight that you have is now an insight that 150 of us have and can discuss if we have different perspectives. And that is very powerful. And I think maybe a tangible example of that gives people an idea of the true power of decentralized learning is, okay, let's see if I can word this right. So I think that today, if you're an individual and you're like, I want to know everything there is to know about food, if you dedicate 40 hours a week, like full-time job, for a full year of learning about food, and you have a high skill learning, you're a capable learner, you're resourceful, you know what good information is and what non-good information is based on, critical thinking or the scientific method. If you dedicate 40 hours a week for 1 year, you will be in the top 0.1% of people in the world that understand food. You just will be if you're an effective learner, because you can learn anything now. All the information is available. You just have to be able to consume it, distill it, make sense of it. And so 1 year, full-time job, learning about food, you're basically an expert on food. Mm-hmm. That would be just one person. Now, in terms of decentralizing that, if instead of one person, there's 10 people, instead of 40 hours a week, all you have to do is put in 4 hours a week. The one caveat there is you got to be able to coordinate with the other people so that you're learning different elements of that. Mm-hmm. And if instead of 10 people, you go to 100 people, well, now each person only has to do about 25 minutes a week, and collectively they can essentially turn into an expert on food. And so that would be an example of the potential of decentralized learning, where learning is done by multiple. And obviously, when you get to like scales of like 100, the coordination part is the rate limiting step. It's not the ability to learn, but if you put in place learning teams and sort of sense-making protocols or systems for communicating and organizing this knowledge, it turns out it's actually not that difficult. And so that's kind of an example where like 100 people devoting 25 minutes a week learning about food in a coordinated way can create 100 experts on food, quote unquote experts, high level of knowledge, in a very short period of time. And, that eats up any centralized learning approach, because it's just so exponential. And that's not even taking into account like the emerging things that get learned with people speaking together, right? That's just as if they're like 100 robots learning. It can happen really quick. So that's an example of decentralized learning.
That's funny you said that eats up.
Yeah.
So an example, I think like we started to touch on this a little bit in the Footnerd program with the meat channel, right? So a little, it seems like we, with you and Stian, started a conversation. Stian's a Footnerd from Oslo, Norway, and he and Nick started this conversation about meat. Well, then they took that conversation to our digital platform Slack and started a conversation with the Footnerds. And I think tell me if I'm right, is this a kind of an example of like starting the process of that? Because we have chiropractors and naturopath doctors and all kinds of different people who got involved in the conversation with so many different perspectives that we now have this scaffold of exactly what you're talking about. Do you think that's fair to say that that's like an example of that decentralized learning?
That's a perfect example of sort of the emergence that comes through network effects. So a couple important things there. First one is that me and Stian disagreed on several points, but we disagreed in a way where we respected each other's perspectives and wanted to understand. Like I wasn't going in there defending my perspective. I wanted to understand his, and vice versa. And then we took that and said, well, why don't we involve more people in the conversation? And then you see this dialogue that happens with a bunch of people across the whole planet with very different perspectives. I learned so much by reading through that transcript that I probably couldn't have learned by myself in the course of like 6 months of diving into it. So that's a perfect example. And that's a perfect example of how all of these different perspectives come in. One person can then read this transcript of a bunch of people's understanding, and then we can all collectively sort of take from it what we want and discover these underlying principles or truths that are common with all of our understandings. And and that's an example of also rules without rulers, right? The rules of engagement of having a good generative conversation are that you go in seeking understanding and trying to learn, not trying to defend your position. Therefore, it means that in that dialogue, there might be 20 people. There is no one person that controls the knowledge or that is known as the knower. We are all contributing in equal ways to this pool of knowledge, which we can then see what everyone else is thinking and extract like some pretty cool stuff. So that's a perfect example.
Yeah, and there's so many resources, right? So it's probably will end up being like a pretty long transcript, but within that dialogue, there's no fat in there. There's no, it's so lean, like the chemistry, the background, the experiments from the strength and conditioning coaches, from the naturopath, from the nurses, like there's so much in there that I feel like in that one channel, I got more in that one, whatever 2-week dialogue than I got in all of my years of nutrition training. You know, like you have so many resources there. So I think that is a really good example.
Yeah, that's some lean meat right there.
That's some lean, mean fighting machine stuff. Okay, so with this idea of decentralized learning, now that we've defined it, how will we then implement that? I mean, we're already implementing that in our own learning community. So like, what are the benefits going forward with utilizing, I mean, you told me the benefits, like, yes, we can learn at an exponential speed, but then how does that translate into like real life health nodes?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it brings up sort of, that's one element of what I would consider to be a paradigm shift in how we learn. And so maybe even just unpacking for a minute or two, like the notion of paradigm shifts, right? Like a paradigm is like this model or worldview of how things are being done, a pattern. And, a lot of people say that paradigm shifts only happen when there's a generation change, like a turnover in very different generations of people across the world, or when there's a war. Those are kind of the two biggest catalysts for a paradigm change. And I think kind of both of those things are happening right now, like the war being against nature or COVID-19. And, you see this phase shift, this transition in a lot of industries where technology is essentially correcting inefficiencies by stepping in to replace outdated systems or institutions, right? You see, like, for example, Uber is replacing taxis, or Airbnb is replacing hotels, or, LegalZoom is replacing lawyers. And these are just online digital solutions to inefficiencies in the way we're doing things. And, I really think the paradigm shift in higher education has slowly been in motion for probably I would say the past 5 years. But I think COVID-19 essentially fast-tracked that shift exponentially, right? The old model of spending huge amounts of money and going into debt to obtain a degree that essentially, in a world that's constantly changing, carries little value in the real world, which is changing faster and faster. And I think that old model is sort of dying off and it need to be replaced, right? Like someone who's spending $30,000 a year to go to a university that can't even go there anymore and is sitting in their bedroom learning. Well, why are they paying $30,000? And when YouTube is like this free resource for the whole planet where you can learn anything, we need to change things a little bit. So, and to me personally, higher education and health is especially concerning because the ripple effect of training professionals who are known as health professionals in the diagnosis and management of disease without actually teaching health means that everyone ends up sick, including those professionals themselves. So I think that the transition shift is happening. And I think there's a lot of solutions that there's a lot of problems we've solved with the Footnote program. And maybe a good place to go next is talk about number one, give respect to the institution of university and the people who work within it, because they're the ones who brought us to where we are today. And then maybe we can talk about problems, current problems that we see in the current in academia, and then some solutions. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And personally, my background is that I come from a background where I'm a first generation grad. I'm Mexican American, and university, going to college was like a huge deal for me, right? Because I didn't really have any place else to go. I mean, that just seemed like a logic. My grandmother, my grandparents, my parents, everybody said, you just got to get an education because that's what's the most important thing. That's how you're going to be better than where we came from. So I value that. Then I was an athlete, and I went to my undergrad I think I told you this before, like I was a PE major, and and I was a PE major at a really good school that had a great physical education program. And it was so good, Nick, though, because like we learned so many cool things, like as a PE major, and I was always a little bit ashamed of like being a PE major, even at that time.
Why?
Because it
Why
was
were you ashamed of that?
because it seemed like the smart people went, like my best friends were going to be doctors, and it was like those who can't do stuff become PE. I don't remember what the phrase is, but it's like those who can't teach PE or something. And I was like, oh man.
Right.
But the fact is like, as you know, I was largely a wild child. And when I went to college and I was a PE major, I just freaking got to play. We had all of these classes like analysis. Part of our actual programming was to take analysis courses like analysis of synchronized swimming, analysis of diving, archery, golf. I learned to become like this very well-rounded, generalized athlete. I also played basketball. But then at my senior year, the shame of like being a PE major, they changed the whole system to be called health sciences. So no longer did they even call, were we even called PE majors. We were like in the health sciences. So from that very early stage, I was like a dumb jock kind of, when in fact I got a world-class education. Then I went on to kinesiology, and that's like the name I stand behind, is like I'm a kinesiologist, but really I'm like those guys in the strength and conditioning cage did not look healthy. Their skin was not healthy. They were taking all kinds of creatinine supplements, and they were trying to get the women on board, and I was like, I don't want to do that, like there was some other cool things going on, and I gravitated towards like spinal injury research and stuff, and that was cool. But by and large, I was not taught health the way that we're being taught health now. But I want to just say that like there are, and then the socialization. So the biggest benefit I got from going to college was I learned how to be a polite human. That's, I learned how to talk to, I learned the difference between talking to my professors with respect. I learned how to negotiate being a polite human in the world. Like now I know not to say the F word in front of my professor, and I know not to physically fight, and I had to comb my hair if I wanted to be, you learn how to like just be a part of society.
Right. And, I would argue that some parts of that programming may not be of a huge amount of value, right? Like, I think being respectful can be done without ascribing to the script of what culture teaches you as being respectful. Right. And I think like, one of the things I learned in university, which is very powerful, we even talked about before, like everything I learned, there's a lot that gave me value from university, aside from the actual things I learned, right? Which was why I went there in the first place. But what I discovered is like, the whole notion of growing up, of being an adult, of taking care of yourself, having to make your own food, live in your own place, go to class on time, submit assignments on time, like committing to something and doing the work and, organizing your time to do shit on time because that's when it's due. That's a very important life skill. And I think that's still valid and important, but I also think that like the way we learn and the things we learn should be updated in that model. And I also think that like the amount that you pay a professor who's making $150,000 a year salary is like, that doesn't need to be like that. Like that person doesn't need to be guaranteed a job regardless of how good they are at it. And that centralization of one person teaching when you have access to the world of knowledge on the internet is also getting a bit outdated. So, I don't want to discount people working in universities and academia. I don't want to discount the value of university, but I do think that we need to be honest with ourselves and identify issues with the way it's currently done as we go through this kind of paradigm shift and identify ways we can solve those problems.
Yeah.
In ways that benefit the greater good, benefiting. Yeah.
No, you brought up the idea about like money too, and it's not something that we often talk about, but like the more sinister aspect of getting the education and learning how to be a polite adult human, respectful, which, is not the point of university, is that also, I went to school at a time when they had, I don't know if they're allowed to do this anymore, but like in the quad, they had credit card companies out there essentially preying on students. So I got my first credit card in the quad at university, and much longer before I ever was taught how to be responsible for using it. So rather than using it responsibly, I bought my friends drinks and at the bar and like,
yeah, it's like a rite of passage in university.
Exactly. So we had that, and then not to mention, like I told you, I'm a first generation graduate. We didn't have money. I was on a partial athletic scholarship, and I tried not to go into debt. But I have $100,000 in student loan debt, and that most of that is from interest, because originally it was like $40,000. So I think that's one thing that you've talked about a lot, and I think that's worthy of talking about, because maybe if your parents paid for school and you had the luxury of that, or you had a full scholarship or something, you don't have debt, but so many people have university debt, and for what?
Right. Yeah, and I think one thing that does, the high price of university does this weird second order effect, which is that people who do not choose to live with debt will not go to school or will not get that university degree, which creates a barrier to access. So it's not accessible for everyone financially, but it also creates an artificial scarcity where, there's not as many people are doing that. Especially, let's just take like the health degrees in particular. Not as many people are willing to go into debt. Therefore, there's an artificial scarcity in people who are known as the knowers of health. And that makes it so that accessing those people, you have to pay more money. And what's even worse is that they're not even taught health, right? They're being told you're doing this degree to be a health professional, and yet we're not going to teach you anything about health. We're going to teach you everything about disease and diagnosing and treating and managing disease. So it's like this double whammy where it's like we create a false sense of scarcity of people who can help us with health, and those people aren't even taught about health. How does that make sense? And I think being in debt is like, financial health is a real thing. Financial literacy, knowing how to use a credit card, how to create a budget so that you're not just spending money you don't have, and not going deep in debt. Like that's an element of health, financial health. And so, this whole notion of like, people who the institution of academia they're not bad people. But the getting a degree is now very unhealthy, both in how you learn, what you learn, and the fact that you're left in a massive amount of debt. Like that's not healthy for individuals. So we have to make degrees, university as a whole, healthy. And we actually have to start teaching health to degrees that are claiming to teach health professionals.
That's right.
So why don't we talk about like the three of the biggest problems that I see with, if we start really high up, what are some of the big problems with higher education and health? And we'll just stick to health for now. But like number one, universities teach disease management and not health. That's a really big one. I think that's the primary one, the big problem.
And let's just break that down. Like, did you ever one time in your entire education have a professor teach you about the benefits of getting a full night's sleep, wholesome, healthy foods, whatever that means? Did you ever hear macronutrient versus micronutrient unless you were in a specialized nutrition program or natural movement, or that we should get up out of our seats and actually move, every 15 or 20 minutes? Did you ever hear anything like that from your health professors?
I didn't. And in fact, all of the food places accessible to me around where I went to school were junk. All of our classes were engineered around long periods of time sitting. The classic notion of university cramming means that I got terrible sleep because I was up late studying or partying. And, I never heard the word mental health once. And I knew some people in my class were not happy. We're not like, I wouldn't consider them to have been mentally healthy during the degree. There was a high amount of stress. There was a high amount of, the kind of person who gets into physiotherapy now is the person with basically straight A's. I kind of snuck in with subpar marks somehow. But most of the people, like the fact that grades are so high to get in physio schools because classes are so small, means that you have to be an A+ student. And those students are often people who aren't, who spent a lot of time with books and not a lot of time with humans. And yet they're going in to learn a job that requires you to be extremely good at understanding and working with humans. And so they're also the kind of person who is typically a perfectionist, who like competes with others, who wants to get perfect marks on everything, on every exam, on every practical test. And so there's a lot of stress in this program. Like you basically, it's like a 2-year gauntlet of just like, I had my first set of exams in physio school was 11 exams in 10 days. You had several exams in one day and there was no break. And so it was like a strategy of like, how the hell do I study for all this in this amount of time? And it like takes a toll on you. Like I got sick very frequently when I was in school because I was just ramming my body, redlining myself.
Yeah, it's not balanced. It's
Eating
like,
terrible food, not sleeping, and trying crazy. So not only do they not teach that stuff, they actually, in order to complete the program, you have to not do any of those good things for health.
Yeah, and then that's rewarded, right? Being a brain in a jar, you're rewarded for that with and that those, and so then that is the role model that's set, because you want to aspire to be like that. If you are coming up through those programs, that's the way that you succeed, quote unquote. Yeah, so where do you want to go next?
Well, so that's problem number one. Universities teach disease management, not health. Problem two, and this is just my take, and I'm always looking for different opinions, but problem two is overpriced degrees create sort of an artificial scarcity of ineffective health professionals. And then the third one, and this is a big one that, you know, and after this, we'll talk about sort of ways that we've tried to solve these problems through the Footnote program. Okay. The third one is that education seems to be focused on memorizing information that gets confirmed by tests. And they don't focus on learning that's by understanding and sort of embodying that knowledge, which I really feel is the only way to teach health, is like facilitate understanding. And you know, like I always feel like rote memorization of things that are fed to you that you have to consume creates very fragile knowledge, right? Where, you know, it's like teaching someone, this is a red-bellied woodpecker. And you memorize that and what it looks like. But then if someone says like, oh, you hear that sound? I wonder what bird that is. Oh, look at that nest. What is that? Or look at the color of that bird. Like, it's very fragile because you're limited to only knowing the things you memorize because you don't actually understand, right? You just sort of consumed the little small, narrowly defined package of superficial information, but you don't have a deep understanding through experience of that knowledge. So, you know, those are kind of the big problems. And then what we tried to do at the Footnote program was solve those by replacing, you know, creating a learning community focused on health, not just disease management, making the program affordable and permitting global access, so anyone in the world can access it. And then the last one, which is the big one, is to focus on applied learning and sort of understanding, not just memorization. So I think those are big advances in evolving how we think of this whole concept of learning in higher education, to really give people tools to then like go and explore, instead of like, this is what you need to know. It's like, here's a framework for learning. Let's make sure you understand how to learn and build the skill of learning. And then like go explore, discover, you know, define health, how it works for you, or like do all these experiments and see what you end up with, and fail a lot and take notes and be a, you know, a student scientist of the sort of realm of learning. And I think that's very powerful.
You know, that I always come back to my original undergrad degree where they got it right, because one of the things that we would have to do in these analysis of classes is we would have to create a lesson plan. We'd have to learn everything about that, like let's say synchronized swimming, because I don't know why that was so fun, but like you would have to really understand the rules, but then after you learned, right, because you kind of have to do that grappling with the actual intellectual material, you had to then go and teach in front of your peers. And you had to do two things. You had to participate in the actual activity. So like when if you and I, Nick, if you and I were in the synchronized swimming class together, you would have to teach me. I would do your routine. Like,
I would definitely take that class, by the way. That sounds like a great class.
It's so fun, to music, underwater, kicking your legs, and
mermaid.
Anyway, yeah, you'd be a merman and I'd be a mermaid. And then, but you would have to, you'd embody the actual teaching by doing it. And then you would have to teach it to your peers. So one of the things about centralized learning that, so I taught anatomy and physiology in junior college for many years. And one of the things that I always tried to do was like get them out of their chairs and interacting with each other. At first, it was because they were exhausting me, you know, like they wanted they want to suck all the information. Tell me what I have to do to get an A. Tell me what I have to do to get an A.
Yeah.
So then I was like, well, no, you get out of your chair and you participate. So even during lectures, I would try to get them like moving around and talking to each other and discussing the information. And then I switched my anatomy lab exams to oral exams because I was like, you're killing me. Like I am working so long and you come in a passive way and you're not getting anything from it.
Mm.
So then I would have them tell me everything that you learned about all the markings on the femur. And that was so awesome because they would be I got the worst ratings sometimes in that Rate Your Professor.
Because it made people work and learn.
But the thing is that the people that loved it, that realized that they benefited from it, were that they really embodied the learning. And so I think that's what you're talking about in the Foot Nerd program. I think that's why I gravitate towards this, is because it takes the good parts that, I don't know, I learned and creates that, like, where you're doing it as a group. And anyway, so.
Yeah. And like we've learned a lot of, I've learned personally some immense things through the Foot Nerd program. And, one of them is that decentralized learning is very powerful. Mm-hmm. This whole collective notion of collective intelligence and hive mind and everyone learning and sharing, very powerful. I've learned that community is essential for learning and practicing health, right? Like health is really a team sport. You have to do it with the support of others. You have to do it with learning from others. And I also learned, based on the amount of different people coming into this program, like we have people in Korea, in China, in Peru, is that health is a global language, and also that it's constantly evolving. So it's not fitting to simply learn health. It is a lifetime commitment to the process of learning health and being open-minded to proving yourself wrong through self-experimentation and having conversations with others. And that's very important. And I think the final thing I learned is that, like, critical thinking and the scientific method, which is very different from research, are crucial tools for sense making, for us to be able to, rules without rulers. If we all agree by the rules that we look to critical thinking and the scientific method to guide our process of inquiry, then all of a sudden, there's no one person that is the knower, right? Someone might have a deeper knowledge on a certain topic. And so maybe that earns them the right to teach it for the time being. But collective sense making and us coordinating and figuring things out really happens through agreeing on the rules of how we actually make sense of the world. And that's that's been insanely powerful. Like, I've learned so much from in the community and just the emerging things that happen with the community itself through the Foot Nerd program. And I think that brings us to today, where it's like, what's the next step in the Foot Nerd program? How do we take what we learned with the Foot Nerd program, this very sort of niche community of really cool people that have created and learned from this thing we've done, this learning community, and how do we scale that up to make it more available and to really create sort of like a broader learning community that's available to more people, that we can really offer like an off-ramp to people who don't align with traditional university, realize that maybe they're not getting the right knowledge to be effective at helping others with their health. And instead of just taking the off-ramp right off and just saying, well, I'm just going to work somewhere else or do something else, it's like, well, here's an alternate path that is affordable, accessible, focuses on learning, and better yet, isn't just transactional, right? Like you pay, it's like a transaction with universities. I pay you X amount of dollars. You give me a piece of paper that basically I know. And that transactional nature is very odd in something that involves learning. Whereas what we're trying to do is create, like, you go through this rite of passage of 1 year committing to learning about health and sort of reading all of the knowledge that we've distilled so far. But then the learning continues after, and we want to support people being able to find meaningful work within what they've learned, to use what they've learned. And just as a small side note, I had this conversation with someone the other day, trying to make an analogy of like what it's like to go through physio school and realize that you really don't know health. And it would be the difference between, if tomorrow Ruth's like, I want to be a sumo wrestler. Okay, the way that it's done right now is like, I'll just watch a documentary on sumo wrestling and then get a certificate saying I watched the documentary, and then I'm a sumo wrestler.
But I gotta buy that diaper looking thing too.
Yeah, you gotta buy that as part of like your certification. Yeah. And to assume that you can sumo wrestle after watching a documentary and wearing the diaper, like, no, that doesn't make you a sumo wrestler. Like, you better start eating rice, girl. You better get in the ring or you're
Yeah.
going to get your ass kicked. And the crazy thing is, like, people are becoming sumo wrestlers after documentaries, watching documentaries.
Yep.
They're going into the ring, they're getting their asses handed to them, and then they're creating schools to teach other people how to sumo wrestle without ever going into the ring. Like,
Yeah.
this is the, you know, like, we got to actually practice it. So, like,
Yeah.
that's kind of the way I look at it, is like, I became a health professional by watching the documentary, which was all my teachers. I assumed I knew, and then I treated patients, but I actually didn't know health. I was unhealthy myself. I got my ass kicked in the ring of health. And, you know, it's humbling to be like,
Yeah.
wow, I just spent a lot of time and money being told I was learning health when really I was learning to be as a symptom treater. Not saying this is the case with everyone, right? Like, some people might go through school and be deeply engaged with health and be healthy. But from what I saw with all the other people I went to school with and conversations I've had, like, there's a lot of people in that boat, even like, and that applies to like medicine, especially the amount of doctors I know that don't have good health, because they actually were never taught health, is astounding. And we need to get sumo wrestlers eating rice and getting in the ring. And that's kind of what the Footner program is. It's like, you know, drink the juice of health, get in the ring of health, fail many times, talk to other people that are in the ring, and we can all get together in this dojo of learning and actually become sumo wrestlers, actually become health guides instead of just like degree holders.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. I think that is absolutely true. And so, and you can kind of see like the Foot Nerd community at large and people who are interested in Beam Tribe and the Foot Collective, like posting their embodiment on social media and Instagram. And I think that's a really good use of that. It's like this natural accountability that's built in where like you see, I mean, I'm not like a super big, you know, technology person and stuff, but since I've been using Instagram, going into the, you know, like consciously using it and looking at like foot nerds all over the world getting on the beam, like it just is, it's very inspiring because it's showing like exactly what you're saying, like people in the ring and doing like such fun things, moving their bodies, eating great food, sleeping, breathing, and it's pretty powerful. One thing I wanted to ask you before we go on to actually tfcU and where the culminating and like what we wanted to talk about today, which is like what's next for our community, is I wanted to ask the question: are there any problems with decentralized learning? Do you see any obstacles or problems that we need to solve with like bringing a community together in this way? Like, what are the challenges, if any?
Yeah, and that brings up a good point. Saying that decentralized learning is a better alternative and solves that problem doesn't mean it's easy. I think the biggest variable, like that analogy I gave with someone doing 40 hours a week and then 10 and then 100, when you get to 100, it's like you got to have some pretty robust systems and protocols in place to coordinate those 100 people effectively to actually learn the stuff. And so, you know, this whole element of, I'm reading a book right now called the Fifth Discipline, and it's all about learning organizations. And one thing they talk about is that the functional unit of a learning organization is not the individual, it's a learning team. And so the challenge is, and we're kind of like seeing this now with maybe a little bit more, and that's Dunbar's number. And all of a sudden you start to mushroom into a size of a community that is beyond what the average person is designed to, you know, be able to handle cognitively. Of connecting with more than 150 people gets really hard. And, you know, if we had 1,000 people instead of 150 people in the Footner program, I think what we need to do is create sub segments of like sub tribes within this global tribe, not as a way to alienate people, but as a way to leave you with your community, which is interconnected in this web of communities, which you can cross-pollinate and interact with others. But I think the biggest challenge is, how do you maintain a sense of connection with a community and an organized system for learning in a decentralized way when numbers get really big? And I think those problems need to be solved when we get there. I don't think they're tough problems. They're not impossible problems. And I think a lot of what we, even with the Footner program, has prepared us to be able to solve those problems. And the cool thing about this, you know, like going into different sub communities, is that that's not just a community for when you're in the program. Like that is a health community for life that you can stay connected with if you so choose. And that's really powerful because it goes beyond that year-long period to really keep you integrated in this group of people that have all embarked on a lifelong learning journey. And so you can hold each other accountable and support each other and continue your learning within your tribe, within your specific community, which I think for tfcU would be geographically optimized so that your community is the one that you can actually find people in the same time zone to talk with or the same local area to interact with. So I think that's the biggest challenge is coordination and maintaining a good experience for students at scale and for maintaining tight integrated communities at scale. But I think I think we can solve those problems. We've already had to kind of solve them. And I see that as really the only obstacle, as long as we create a really clear set of quote unquote rules for how we make sense of the world. This whole notion of rules without rulers, if we all agree on the rules, and that's almost like the selection criteria for people wanting to come into this community is they agree with these clear rules that we basically codify in our manifesto, then this is going to be some exciting stuff. And so that's kind of the vision for tfcU is to scale up the Footnerd program, maybe change the branding so it's less of a niche name, but create a year-long learning journey that's accessible to anyone, not even just people who want to help others, who want to be health professionals, but like anyone who wants to take radical ownership for their health and be integrated in a community and have a learning experience sort of like to guide them through this process, right? It's really just, they just need clarity of what they need to kind of engage with in terms of learning, not be told what to learn necessarily, but have some guidance so that they're like, okay, I know what I need to do next. And if I have questions, I can talk to someone that's maybe already done it or is going through it. And that's very powerful.
Yeah. So let's jump into the TFC University then, because that's where we're headed, right? So can we talk about how like TFC University is the next development in what we're doing? And then can we go through the flow of like how it would work with the Footnerds and then like the community at large, like what it would actually look like in real life if you were a person in the community or a Footnerd. Can we just go through the flow of why and how you would become involved?
Yeah, and what, funnily enough, nomenclature and wording matters. And I spoke to sort of like a business advisor that I speak to intermittently, and he's like, that if you call it a university, there's a lot of baggage with that. Like, you register, you have to get permit, you have to pay a bunch of money to governments. So I think let's just call it TFCU, and I like that because it's really about you. It's not about TFC. It's not about university. It's about you getting healthy.
Oh, it's like TFCYOU.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, it's kind of sneaky because I say, oh, I went to Ottawa U University. So people might assume it means university, but we'll see how that goes.
We're going to make a cheer. TFCYOU.
Yeah, I might have to make a dance. TFCYOU.
You. Okay, sorry, go. Sorry.
That's okay. So, I mean, for Footnerds, it's basically just a branding change, right? Like the Footnerd program is our, I think the way I think about it is we would have a base program at tfcU, for lack of a better name right now, it's called the Healthy Program, because really the goal is to get healthy, to approach a state of healthy, which is really not an end destination, but a process. So the Healthy Program is for anyone. So if you have back pain and you're like, I want to figure this shit out, but I also want to understand the whole realm of health, and I want to, I know people that spend thousands and thousands of dollars on personal training, and they do it with the notion of that's the solution to my back pain, is I just need to get a personal trainer. They'll crack the whip, tell me what to do. And oftentimes they're disillusioned. And after like a couple months, they're like, this sucks. This isn't fun. I wasted a bunch of money. So for like John with back pain that wants to just do a 180 in health. And I think the calling to the need for health solutions now is bigger than ever with COVID, right? Like, like people need to understand their health and how to optimize individual health to have good immune systems to make them resilient to something like a virus. So I think the spotlight on health is there. now. But John can go through this foundational program at tfcU and learn about health and be placed in a community that can support John on his lifelong process to health. So just average person with pain or who just wants to take back responsibility for health, the base program at tfcU would be a great option. That healthy program, that base program, is kind of like exactly what the Foot Nerd program is right now. So Foot Nerds would always be this special group of really people who co-created the foundation for tfcU. Like everyone in this program who has the moniker of Foot Nerd played a pivotal part in creating the foundation, which tfcU is sort of like being built on. And so they would essentially they would always be Foot Nerds, but they would essentially get credit for completing the healthy program at tfcU. And that healthy program would be the prerequisite base program, which would need to be done by everyone at tfcU, including people who want to go a step further and not take back responsibility for their health, actually help others. So health professionals who want to help others would then layer on like a pro course on top of their healthy prerequisite. So you got to take the healthy program and actually do a year to engage radically with your own health process, because that's actually where you learn most of the stuff. And then the pro program would be kind of different divisions. And the way I think about it right now is there's a movement pro, and that's for like personal trainer, a yogi, a running coach. They become a movement pro. Then there's a rehab pro, so like chiro, physio, massage therapist. And there's a medical pro, which would be like a doctor, a dentist, like someone in the world of medicine. And each of those pro categories will have sort of their own guidelines and sort of quality standards. So like with movement, you actually assess objectively someone's movement instead of just guessing at what they need to work on. For rehab, same thing, movement screening, like objective movement screening, like the functional movement screen is great. And then for medicine, like practice standards, where it's like you create its own manifesto. I use drugs as a tool, not as a solution, or I seek understanding of the person instead of just the thing they're coming to see me for. So we have like really smart people, which are not me, but like doctors create a panel, decide on these practice standards, and then that guides sort of the additional layer of health pro as a medical pro. Still needs to be worked out, but that's kind of like base layer is get healthy, understand health personally. Then if you want to be a pro and help others, you kind of like can do that extra course. And then I think the really cool thing is, everyone gets placed in a community when they're done that year-long process. But for pros, it's not transactional. We're like, okay, you're a pro, you have the certification, that's great. But we can actually facilitate them connecting with people who need help by creating like this health help marketplace, which is like a global directory of everyone who's graduated from a pro program. You get listed there. People can reach out to you and ask for help. You can give feedback on how helpful and leave honest feedback so that it's like, yeah, this person was great. They helped me, but they weren't really good. Their emotional intelligence wasn't that good, so they didn't really connect with me. Well, great. That feedback allows us to make sure that pro, so that we can say like, you're getting all these people reviewing the help that you're giving them. And it seems like emotional intelligence is something that people are feeling as a gap. Well, here's the emotional intelligence course of Health Pro. Maybe you should brush up on that. Like help them bridge the gaps instead of just saying, oh, you suck at this. It's like, no, okay, like here's a gap that you might not know you have. Let's help you improve. Like it's a team approach of everyone is getting better together through honest feedback. And I think the cool thing that marketplace does is it creates a new game of health where the incentive is to be good at helping people get healthy, because that becomes financially rewarding, which is not the way it's currently organized in the game theory, where it's like, as a physio, the crappier you are at getting people better, the more money you make. How does that make sense? Right? Like it's wacky. So if we can align the interest of you make more money based on getting better health outcomes, that's really powerful, because now it's profitable to be good at helping people with their health. And that's like the fundamental change. And also that is literally a health system, right? Educate the people who can help the people, provide access of people in need of help with people who want help. That's literally a health system, and fills the void that we have right now because we just have a disease management system. So I think that was a lot of blah, but hopefully
no. That was a great, that was like the verbal flow chart, which is I'm starting to be more clear about. And I think that other people will be clear about too, the more that you hear it. But I think one of the things that you were saying about cross-pollination, which I'm always like, what? I kind of I drift into the trees and the blossoms and stuff, but I'm like, what does that actually mean? And I think what you're saying, if I understand, is that, so we have like Health Pro, and then you're going to talk about natural podiatry in a second too.
Mhm.
Okay, so you have Health Pro with all the categories under there, the rehab, the movement, and the medical. And then you have natural podiatry, and then you have Health Marketplace. But what you have, it seems like, and I'm really excited about this, because you have all of these people together as our community that when you say cross-pollinate, that means like if I'm a health pro in movement, but I have, I know that my whole entire community, I might need to talk to a naturopath about herbs, or a doctor about MRIs or something, like where we have access to each other. So it's this really whole integrated approach to health long-term. So we're all under the umbrella, like in one giant building, like all of us, all the strength coaches, all the yoga teachers, all the freaking dance teachers, all the doctors, so that if like the person who's dealing with cancer patient, maybe what they need is to pick somebody's brain about dancing while undergoing chemotherapy, like there's just this holistic integration, which I am so excited about. Where do I sign up?
Well, we're working on creating it together. So, you already signed up.
Oh, right.
But one thing that, this whole element of when you graduate, when you finish your rite of passage of taking the health program, you get placed in a community, which is geographically based. And, we talked about this whole notion of like naming these communities after plants or animals. So you might be in the elk community, which is in Canada. And you can speak to people in other communities. The thing is like, okay, if these communities, and I've sort of been thinking about how many people are in that community, right? Dunbar's number is 150, but you probably have at least 50 people in your immediate network. So maybe we put it at 100, which is kind of a good round metric. We can design that 100 person community. Like the elk community would have 10 medical pros, 20 movement pros, 10 rehab pros, and then like 70 people that have done the healthy program. So you automatically have a local, like semi-locally centric network where if you are a person who's done the healthy program, but you still need guidance, and there is a place for health professionals, like I don't want to understate that. Even if you've done the healthy program, like you still need help. Like I will still need help from a medical professional probably at some point in my life, because their understanding is simply deep in that silo, that area of health. And instead of me learning that, I can just go speak to someone who has the same fundamental understanding of health and takes responsibility for their health. But I know they have a specific understanding, specific knowledge of medicine. And so I immediately have the first, like I know who I would go see. I would go see one of the 10 medical pros in the elk community. Exactly. And that's where I would go first. And, those pros talk to other pros in like, the cedar community, and they talk together, and we have like global summits where we all cross-pollinate everything we've been learning, right? This whole system, sense-making protocols of creating system, network systems where we all learn from each other. And that, like technology is really the accelerant in that, because technology can facilitate that. Whereas like, it's really hard to do that with just like traditional in-person tribal gatherings. And I think, the in-person element is still very important. And I think TFCU would want to facilitate as much in-person connection as possible, right? Like the primary part of our learning is done remotely. But part of health is community. Understanding community means wanting to engage in person with other human beings, not just like I'm engaging with a computer right now, which is communicating to your computer, which you're communicating with, but like in person, very important.
That's you. I see you there.
Virtual hugs.
I'm gonna hug my computer.
But yeah, so I think community design is an important part of this. And we would have literally a team of people who deeply understand community and are able to help create this sort of like community design where we have a certain percentage of pros of each category in each community. And like, those are problems that need to be solved and things that need to be worked on. But like conceptually, that's not that hard to do. And so natural podiatry, just to put a little pin in that, is like, That one, there's specific, there's pros that have done a pro program that have specific knowledge. So just like a movement pro would be a health pro that has specific knowledge in the realm of movement.
Mhm.
And another important thing there is like the medical pros don't need to do movement. They can just know that, well, there's movement pros in our community. I'm just going to send you to one of them because I know that they have the same basic knowledge, right? Like we all speak the same language and have
Yes.
faith that it's not a crapshoot. It's not like, oh, go find a physio. Hopefully they're good. It's like, no, here's a health pro or a movement pro in our community, in this directory. Go see them because I know them. I've spoken to them. I've sent people to them before. Go see them. Podiatrists would be pros with specific knowledge and like almost a specialization layered on top of a basic understanding of health in foot health. And I think Mind Pro might actually have to be a category as well, where like a psychologist who wants to have they've taken the healthy program. Now they've gained specific knowledge in terms of mental health. That's probably a category too. And there might even be like, not necessarily programs, but people who are a health pro, just as a general banner, and have a specialty in food. So a health professional that has a deep interest in food instead of a nutritionist, food. So there's still some thinking to go through. Like this has been on my brain for probably like a year and a half, but I've never actually dove in because it's never been a pressing project to like really unpack. But now I think we're getting there. And I think that the transition shift in education and the need for health and the big enough, learning pool of what we've learned with the Footnote program is like, we got to do this.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that you touched on, which is also exciting to me, is that like you go through Healthy program, which is a year-long journey, but then you were saying like, there's going to, just because like we're on health is a lifelong process, so that you are always in community with people all along your health process. Like you said, there's going to be probably a time in your life where you'll need to talk with a medical profession, a doctor of whatever you're dealing with, and that our health process is lifelong. So I just wanted to tie that back into tenure. Like you brought, to come back around to like what we talked about, centralized learning. You see it all the time where a tenure professor becomes tenure, and then whatever that means is that like you are locked into your salary. You never can get fired. You rarely get observed. You essentially just you're learning. You just get to do whatever you want to do. Whereas like Healthy program and this community requires that you're always embodying health.
Right.
And so I think that that's a valuable aspect of like the decentralized idea that we're on a health lifelong journey all together. And I don't know, maybe this would be a good place to tie it all up in a nice package. And
I think one thing worth mentioning there is that there's still going to be teachers at tfcU, right? There are still going to be individuals that have a deep level of knowledge on a certain topic, and they should probably teach it to the rest of us, and for us to kind of pick up their knowledge and then take that through our lives to then further our knowledge. And I think a unique thing in the manifesto for TFCU, which I'm kind of working on right now, is 10 points. And one of them is that everyone at TFCU is a student. Some of those students teach. No teachers and students. Everyone is a student, but some of those students will teach.
I just wanted to say, like you said, like when there's feedback, right? So like you said that there was like a practitioner who maybe needed a little extra brush up on emotional intelligence, right? So there's like an accountability system so that you're always a student and you may be teaching. And I think that there's always like that feedback loop of like, how can you continue growing either in health or in, your practice or updating your information. It's transparent. It's complete transparency. It seems like that's right. The idea.
Yeah, and I think that's very important. And the other thing that happens with a global platform is that all of a sudden you're not limited. If Matthew Walker works at Stanford, I can't remember what university he's at, but if he works at Stanford and you don't live in California, you can't really go see Matthew Walker or have him as a professor. But as a global university, you can live in India and you can be taught sleep by Matthew Walker because it can be done digitally. And I think the thing that this opens up is like, the digital world has enabled us to learn from the smartest, most advanced person in the world on a certain subject. which is
Exactly.
very interesting. And that's what should happen, right? The person with the deepest understanding of food on planet Earth should be one of the primary teachers at tfcU community, right? This global learning platform all of a sudden opens up the door to find the best people who want to spread their knowledge, to teach everyone on the planet. That's really cool, right?
Yeah.
Like we can learn sleep directly from Matthew Walker. We can learn food directly from whoever is the biggest resource, like Joel Furman or Michael Pollan, like have a council of people who teach food in different elements. And so, I don't know, the access to amazing teachers takes a whole different meaning when you look at it from a global perspective on a primarily digital learning platform, which encourages in-person interaction amongst local communities. Like that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and you know, I always like how you phrase things, and you were saying that there's this educational transition taking place, and I think an example that I'm seeing regularly are like where we're working with people who are actually university students, like going to school for certain things, but they in their spare time are not even studying their books. They're going onto the internet and they're learning from these people who are providing online seminars, like on YouTube, you know, like we talked about, like Matthew, you can go online and learn any high quality information, and you're still paying $1 bajillion for your university education. And in your spare time, you're getting another education. You're just paying for the letters behind your name. So
yeah, you're paying for the degree. And it's like the degree doesn't even give you the knowledge that you're trying to seek.
Yeah, that you're truly interested in. That's the thing. It's like, wow, well, what are you doing in your spare time? Well, I'm going to school, learning something different on my digital platform.
Right. It's like I'm getting an education, but in my spare time, I'm learning, because an education does not mean learning. Yeah.
That's a great place to end it, Nick.
I agree. Thank you for taking the time today, Ruth, and for your great questions, and, you know, that, you know, gives you a broader perspective of sort of what we're doing at TFC and where we're trying to go. And yeah, if you have any, you know, questions, maybe the good place, and I don't know how many people are going to listen to this, but I'll probably put this on the audio project and on YouTube. So you might get a flurry, but you know, should we put your email on this?
Yeah, the Nerd Helper. Yeah,
so nerdhelperteam@gmail.com. Obviously, all those emails have to be kind of reworked when we get this project going, but that might be the best play. That goes directly to Ruth. So Ruth underplays how skilled she is at her job, but I sometimes label people as special operators, people who are just, you know, no bullshit, get things done, very quick learners, and just very impressive in terms of their effectiveness, like not working on doing things fast. It's like doing the right things. And, you know, Ruth is an amazing community weaver or just a really badass lady. It is a treat to work with you, Ruth. So nerdhelperteam@gmail.com goes right to Ruth. You can send her a virtual hug, or you can ask her questions about what we got going on, or if you want to get involved. And yeah, anything else to say, Ruth? Thank you again for doing this. This was Ruth's idea, by the way. I had nothing to do with this. She was just like, can I just fire questions at you and understand what the shit you're talking about when we talk on the phone?
Yeah, because sometimes I'm embarrassed. I'm like, I don't know if I actually know what decentralized learning is. And so, but thanks, Nick, for all the props. And do you want me to tell you a joke?
Yes, always end with jokes. Oh, Ruth's got great jokes.
Okay, well, just I like the evolution one. So I know I told you this, but we haven't told the other foot nerds this. So why did the dinosaur cross the road, Nick?
I don't know. Why did the dinosaur cross the road?
Because the chicken wasn't born yet.
I don't know why I laughed so hard there. I was like, I'm not going to laugh because I already know this one.
All right. Well, have a great day, and I'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Sounds good. See you later, everyone.
Bye, everyone.